Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the Business Connection, a leading Brazil business podcast talking about business in the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American living in Brazil, known for business networking, and talking from my podcast studio in Campinas, São Paulo, Brazil. Today's guest is Scott Dalgleish, and he's talking with us from Edinburgh, Scotland. Scott Dalgleish is head of marketing at the Scottish Business Network, an independent international membership organization for Scottish entrepreneurs and business leaders. It has a goal to facilitate greater communication and connectivity between the group of talented Scottish companies and a network of leading Scottish diaspora around the globe. Scott has been a guest with us before, and it's always a pleasure to have him back. So with that, Scott, welcome again, and thanks for coming on Talk to Brazil Business Connection.
Thanks very much for having me back. I'm delighted to be here.
And as we've passed another year, I think, when we talked, right? And looking forward to 2021, Scott. At the same time, business challenges and opportunities are there, right? But how do you see the future for your members? What do you see? How do you see a stronger outreach for Scottish companies in the global market?
Well, I think it has all come down to how businesses changed in the last 12 months. I think that it gave everybody a different perspective on what is a global business and how to run a global business, because what was previously a barrier of I won't be able to go there and meet them became I can't go there and meet them. And it's changed people's perspectives a little bit. So as challenging as it has been for a lot of businesses just to remain afloat, I think that this change in perspective is going to allow businesses to grow their companies more and more abroad. And with things in Scotland specifically like Brexit, it means that new markets have become more attractive. And I think that people have noticed in the last 6 months that they can do things like we're doing right now. Brazil to Scotland can be an easy conversation.
Well, I think what you said is true. The new markets can be had, but for some, new markets are survival today, aren't they?
Yes, that is a very good point. That people will have seen their local market change, and especially with people who look for their supply chain might have changed as well, with businesses not surviving or businesses pivoting themselves. And one of the things that if you're an exporting company with a physical good, then with the change of red tape with Brexit, then you'd be as well looking for different markets to send to, because there are currently going to be similar challenges sending to France as they are going to be sending to Brazil. There obviously be different relationships with the countries, but I just think that it's opened people's eyes a little bit to the opportunities of growing relationships internationally, because what might have been a thought process before of it being a barrier to communication, with it perhaps being a language barrier, time differences, never been able to meet them in person. A lot of those things have changed with the way that we now run businesses.
Yeah, well, I think you've expanded where from Europe was your backyard, you have to consider now the whole world is your backyard. And it's just a bigger playing field, right?
Yeah, and it's something that we've always preached at Scottish Business Network, is that there's markets all over the world that are desperate to buy from Scottish companies, and that is for many different reasons. One of which is that Scottish companies are famous for underselling themselves. I can't sell in Hong Kong. There's loads of big companies in Hong Kong. Yeah, but they don't know you exist. We've got some amazing. We're leading the way in things like renewable tech. Obviously, we've got such a strong foundation of education with our really old universities, and their collaboration with the universities in the States as well. Just at the end of last year, the University of Highlands and Islands, they were working with universities in the US to talk about growing their relationships and how they can continue to share information. And I think that if this was 2 years ago, that conversation would be, how do we get out to speak to you guys and meet your staff? And then that would be an additional cost, it would be additional time. You'd have to really plan it in advance. Whereas now, I think that these means of starting relationships have been sped up by the fact that we can just jump on Google Meet and have a chat.
Right now, really, you're just a click away from anybody today.
Yeah.
Literally. And what I found personally through this last year, I've actually been able to participate in more events than previously. Because even in the, let's call them the olden days, when you would be out and coffee and shortbread or whatever, and talking to people, that consumed time. I'm not saying that I don't miss that. But generally speaking, I could be in maybe one event a day at most. And today, now, I can be in 3 or 4 in the same day. And 2 of them could not even be in Brazil. They could be somewhere else. So that really has opened up. I've paid more attention to my agenda, actually, than I did previously. So, well, can I fit? You're invited to many different things. Well, check and see. Well, it's going to be in New York. It's going to be in China. Maybe I have to get up earlier. Maybe I won't go to bed. I don't know. But it's adjusting to that, where previously we'd never thought about that. Because like you said, I have to get on a plane, I have to go somewhere, I have to do something or get in a car. That was limiting.
Yeah, and I think that I'm not trying to take away from the importance of actually seeing your surroundings and becoming familiar with the places that you're going to go, and especially if you are going to start selling a product or a service into somewhere, the need will always arise to have someone on the ground. Mm-hmm. It's just that even before that, the relationship still needs to be built, and now we've shortened the time span of how long it will take to build a relationship because of the way that communications had to speed up. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why we've had such a focus on the US in the last 6 months, and will continue to in this year, because we think that's such an important market for Scottish companies, especially now with a new administration who will be looking to offer new things for Scottish companies in the UK government, as well as our changing relationship with our surrounding countries in Europe.
No, Ned, I agree with you. That's where you should be focused. Obviously, there's a lot of heritage, and when you're out, where are the Scotch people out in the world? I'm sure there is a sizable population. I myself, born in Pittsburgh, my grandfather's Scottish, so and there's a piece of that that's evolved, it's spread out, and it's there. One of my fine challenges is to keep a hand on part of your heritage for a number of reasons. That gets back to what you said of underselling, and sometimes that's cultural, and sometimes understanding why is really what we're talking about. Why don't Scots sell better? Why don't they go and tell everybody how good they are?
Yeah, it's something that we've had several. We do a Scottish International Week every year, which is where we get which was the biggest this past year, because we could get international speakers because we didn't have to rely on their diaries being available to come to Edinburgh or Glasgow. Mm-hmm. So we did have a lot of just sometimes it's the common phrasing. I've experienced this myself, where someone will ask me how things are going, and things have been going really well, and I'll say, yeah, they're all right. Instead of saying, really good, we just landed this amazing deal in America, it's going to be the next big thing. But instead, we'll just say, it's not bad. so that's just a cultural thing that sometimes comes across when you could be talking about your business or your product or your service. Yeah, it's pretty good, rather than it's the best in the world.
Well, that's true. Well, just remembering what we talked about, I guess, last year, one of the things we did talk about when we were talking about the service industry, because we tend to, when we think of export markets, we're talking about products, right? We're talking about raw materials. We're talking about making things. But I think a couple of things we talked about was the health industry, service industry. We're talking about startups. The tech industry doesn't really depend on things. It depends on connectivity, and it certainly does depend on relationships. So companies anywhere can be servicing another company or another country from anywhere, and you don't need a boat or a container or whatever to do it.
And I think again, to bring it up again, what Brexit's done is it's forced the governments of the UK to look to every other country in the world and think, how can we re-establish our agreements and our relationships with your country to make it easier for British and UK businesses to operate. And so when it comes to things like physically exporting something like, I don't know, tweed tartan scarves or, bagpipes if anybody's buying them, or some other things that Scotland are quite famous for, like food and drink. You've got some of the, obviously whiskey is well known, but obviously salmon is a massive quantity here in Scotland, as well as some emerging markets like fragrances and luxury goods. Mm-hmm. So that is a lot of that will surround how do you physically get your product there, what are the taxes and tariffs. But we've got a member who's Edinburgh based who've just struck a deal in Washington because they're a data analytics company and they do a lot with weather and anticipating weather, so that they can, they can do how much gritting do we need to be done, right. How many people do we have to have on hand for upcoming weather, and it also helps with doing things like monitoring the erosion on roads from rain, wind, grit, sand, and it's just that is. It's not a physical good. They don't pack data into crates and put them on ships. So it's just there's so much opportunity there. And again, another thing that Scotland's excelling in is green tech. The Scottish government have got some very aggressive plans for becoming net zero, and with the sheer amount of wind that hits Scotland means that we've been able to generate quite a lot of wind energy, which is seen as an opportunity to look into other renewable tech and we'll sort of invest. And there's some really exciting companies, again, working with some of the big universities in Scotland, which are going to change the way that energy is viewed. And with only 5 million people in Scotland, it's the world that's their oyster. It's not going to be us.
No, but it's really not quantity; it's quality.
Yeah.
We generally look at quantity when you're talking about a market. How many can buy. We're looking at and where the service industry is going. It's more brain power when you talk about innovation. So really, where's the quality of that? And sometimes there are advantages to be where you're there high on a hill, wind blowing in your face, and you come up with a great idea.
Yeah, well, and again, if it is a service, I mean, one thing that we do at Scottish Business Network is we do lots of events, and myself and my colleagues have become quite good at arranging events. But there's other people that we work with who are just as good, and what they would traditionally do is set up events in physical places in Scotland, but they're managed to use their talents to do delivery of successful events online, which means that their potential clients have exploded because all of a sudden you don't have to do this delivery for a company that's based in Britain. Right. You could do it for anybody in the world. Right. So again, that's just another chance. It's just a way for service companies to look at a wider market. And again, you could say, but that'll be too difficult because I'll have to go to Campinas in São Paulo, and that'll take, that's going to cost a lot of money and it's going to take a lot of time. But now we can say, all right, we can just talk to Tom and we can say, well, we can arrange things. And
that doesn't mean we don't want you to come. Don't take it that way.
No. We don't want to come, but it's Brazil.
But anyway, before we talk about Brazil, you mentioned the United States. And recently I saw it, you said you drive to the States. What is happening? What are you doing from a practical sense to revisit America?
So we spent a lot of last year rolling out an ambassador program at Scottish Business Network, and these are people and Scots around the world who have a passion for helping Scottish companies and have really bought into what we're trying to do at SBN. One of the reasons we focused on the US is because we think that's such an enormous market for Scottish companies, and there's such a strong Scottish brand in the United States. Right. There's so many people who can trace their heritage back. It's not like people, it was Burns Day yesterday, and there was people all over the US smuggling haggis and iron brew. So it's such an important market. So what we've done there is we've accelerated our rollout in the US, and this week we announced the opening of an office in New York. Mm-hmm. We've got Fraser Greer, our ambassador in New York, has been working really hard with other ambassadors we've got in Washington and Los Angeles and other people in New York as well, to sort of get in motion this ability to have a presence in New York when that becomes an important thing again, which we think it will very soon, especially with vaccines rolling out. And having a physical presence in the US in different cities also means that we can be part of the conversation when it comes to what the new schemes are with the new administration in the US. What does that mean for Scotland? How can we get a voice for Scotland involved in conversations rather than a voice for the UK? Because like we discussed earlier, it is sort of segmented, and people do recognise it as segmented because it's got such a strong history. So people know Scotland's separate from the UK, and they might know it's part of the UK as well, but if the word Scotland comes up, they're going to recognise it. And we think that that's opportunity. That's what that is.
No, I agree with you. I think part of the opportunity of having boots on the ground and being there and New York specifically, you're in the hub of communication. And just being there, having a presence will drive, like we're doing, just an interview, having people know that you're there and wanting to know why you're there, and giving you the opportunity to talk about that. And then generating events and headlines, and you're an expert in communication. I'm not telling you because you know how that works. But you have to fit the components together to make it work.
Yeah, and we're very fortunate to have the people that are our ambassadors in the US are the ones that have really driven this forward for us. And I think that this is why I think it's been a success, is because of the hard work of them. I also like the romantic side of it being based in New York, because New York was the entry to the New World anyway, Ellis Island, and that's where so many Scots would have passed through generations ago. So it's nice to see that we've got a foot on the ground there as well.
And I saw recently on your LinkedIn profile, actually, you have a very interesting banner and have Business in Burns. Actually, an event coming up now on January 28th, and that's businessandburns.scot, right? www. What is that?
Yeah, so one thing that we've also been passionate about is trying to show what a modern Scotland looks like. As famous as we are for whiskey and tartan, it's so much more than that. And one of the things that we're using Robert Burns as an excuse for is to sort of explore the cultural ties between the US and Scotland, and then use that as a topic of conversation to discuss about all the different things that the business community will have in common, and therefore the opportunities that might be there for inward investment and more importantly for us, Scottish companies exporting more. So it sort of highlights the long-standing ties that the US and Scotland have had. One of the interviews is going to be with a gentleman called David Hopes, who's the head of the collections team at National Trust for Scotland. So he did the interview in the room where Robert Burns wrote most of the songs that he wrote at the end of his life. So he sort of shared some insights into who would visit and who's sent things and who's come to visit there recently, and the amount of American presidents or influential people in American politics and the foundation of that country that loved Burns is just a tie-in itself. And we think that those small things can be used by businesses to sort of have a ground, because you are more familiar in there than you would think, because people will know, people might know that like the North Coast 500 to me is just a bit up the north of Scotland. But the North Coast 500 to someone else could have been the greatest holiday they've ever had.
No, I totally agree with you, because as we look out into any world, any culture, any country, countries are made up of small businesses, of small things. Obviously, we tend to remember everything that's big and the big brands and the more concentration, but small is beautiful. And small generally, it connects to heritage, it connects to the culture, it connects to what we were talking before, that many small businesses, their market may be 10 or 20 kilometer radius around whatever they do. And I'm not saying that's not important, I'm saying that's very important. Because really the heritage from any country, any culture, that's grassroots. And so it's the little things. If you can hide it, and for years we've been learning about niche marketing, haven't we?
Yep.
And, you're just practicing niche marketing. Find your niche and go after it.
Yeah, and that niche might be 10 people in 10 different cities around the world, but it's still there.
It's there, and that's it. So I think it is an opportunity. And back to the positive side of everything, I see this coming year and the coming years positive in that sense. That it doesn't have to be a large, massive concentration of anything. And today technology helps us reach 10 people in 10 different countries at 10 different time zones.
Yeah.
Whatever. That's for anybody. So I think that has given all of us a more level playing field.
Yeah, and I think that it's coming to the forefront of everyone's minds as well now. That sort of it's becoming a reality for a lot of businesses, and it's a lot of businesses that our membership is full of business leaders and business owners, and it's quite refreshing speaking to them and seeing that although it has been such an incredibly tough 12 months for a lot of people, that hasn't slowed them down. And they just sort of see these new opportunities and they just grab them. And that's what we're here to do, is we're here to just add that little bit of support for anybody who goes, oh, I'm thinking of selling into Washington DC. Do you know anybody there? Or I'm trying to connect with this said person in New York. Do you know anybody there? And we do. I think that's what's important. It's just we can be that extra level of support for these companies that are really the ones driving it forward.
Good. Well, talking now, let's change a little bit the direction to Brazil. What do you think? What do Scotch people think about Brazil? Is it just the sunshine and the beaches, or do they think there's more to it?
Well, in the harsh winters, summers, springs, and autumns of Scotland, they do often think about beaches in Brazil. But I think one thing that it'll always be known for is its sheer size, and what would have been seen before as a long way away might be seen as a bit closer to home, because it is going to be more difficult to do business in places like Germany, and hopefully it will be easier to do business in places like Brazil. And one thing that we do at Scottish Business Network is we say, well, never write off a market. You might think, but there will be hundreds of people selling what I'm selling there, but that's because you need to find that out first. And what we're hoping to do is accelerate our ambassadors program outside of the US. We do have ambassadors in places like Singapore, and we recently appointed someone in India as well. So we're looking to sort of get a foothold in different markets in different countries around the world, so that if Scottish companies do come to us saying, do you know anybody in Brazil who could help me with this? We can say, we definitely do. This is support, yeah. And especially, Brazil as a market is enormous, and it's so diverse that it needs people inside to be able to identify which areas. You mentioned earlier the Campinas region is so different to different parts of the country as well, and everyone else, but every area will specialise in different things.
Right. And I mention this frequently on my podcast. The Campinas region, the city of Campinas, where I am, is 1.3 million people. We talked the greater Campinas region, which is like 26, 27 different municipalities which make up the greater region. It's over 3 million. So when I don't want to say, for comparison, you mentioned 5 million in Scotland, but if you just look at 3 million, it's a good trade-off. If you 200 million Brazilians versus 5, but the concentration, the niche marketing, finding the slice of the pie that can be attractive, because obviously, too, investment to try to reach a larger market's a lot of money, but maybe a smaller investment to reach a portion of that market that's attuned to whatever you have to offer is a good place to start.
And again, it's traditionally a lot of the relationships that Scotland have in that area, that part of the world in South and Central America is sort of steamed in oil and gas, because Scotland specifically has a big oil and gas history. Mm-hmm. So traditionally, that's the people that you would know in that part of the world, right, which means that might be quite limiting if your product or service isn't in that sector. So being able to expand a little bit, it's also, that could be your first foot on the ground in South America. This is the first relationship, first understanding of what local markets are like there, and then, you should speak to my friend in Chile, or you should talk to my friend in Buenos Aires. Right. It snowballs from there. And what we're hoping to do is provide that, because it's people who are happy to help, and they're sitting there waiting to be asked, and nobody's asking them.
Well, it gets back to selling. Got to go out and make yourself known and show people there's more to it than the kilt, I guess. So
yeah, exactly.
But anyway, I think those are the points, and I suggest and agree with you that that's the start of trying to find your ambassadors, helping them, reaching out, showing that the distances have become shorter because of what's happening. Everybody's become virtual. There's no aversion now to virtual connections. And someday, somewhere, sometime, we'll all be able to meet again. But in the meantime, business starts just planting a couple seeds somewhere.
Yeah, and I think that the more you reach out to the world, the smaller you realise the world actually is. And everyone's, cultures do vary, but people are people. So once you get to know them, a relationship builds, and that's how everything starts. So, so what previously might have been my Edinburgh business is looking to sell more into Glasgow, it could be my Edinburgh business is looking to build relationships in Campinas. Right. Because why not? I have to do both of them over the phone anyway.
Yeah, or with the university here, or research institutions, or whatever.
It's already connections there.
You're talking about oil and gas, but you also mentioned wind. And we're talking about a lot of focus in the future now of the alternative energy. So it is the windmill itself. It's all of the controls. It's all of the systems. It's integration. There's a whole lot of things that come with anything.
That's a really important aspect of and a really good opportunity this year, because COP26 is the sort of international gathering of nations to come together to decide this is a target we need to reach by 2050. How are we going to do that, and how are we going to keep each other accountable for that? And that's taking place in Glasgow. It was supposed to happen last year, but it got postponed. Mm-hmm. So all government eyes of the world will be on Glasgow, as all these massive important people have to decide on the future of the planet. So for Scottish companies to be able to get involved in that is just going to put a further highlight on the fact that there's a big world out there.
Now, and Scotland, Glasgow, Edinburgh, all of the countries, a beautiful place to see and go. And, the wind, the cold, whatever, it's beautiful. I've never seen green like that in my life anywhere. Seriously. So it's a cultural event. And I think that's another side that certainly the country has developed well when we're looking at the educational side. That too, connectivity with the academics throughout the world can be highlighted, should be highlighted.
And I think the universities in Scotland have always done a good job of making those international connections, and it's something that businesses can learn from. But as you say, sort of with the culture that is with Scotland, with our events, Business in Burns, for anybody who wants to check it out, it's all hosted online, it's all completely free, and you'll get a little bit of that culture, or as we like to say in Scotland, a little bit of the patter.
Good, it's a good place to go. So we're coming to the end of our time, but I do want to highlight again. So Business in Burns in the States, that Business and Burns, BURNS.Scott, right? For our listeners to find you, that's on LinkedIn, and that's Scott Dalgleish. It's SCOTT, right? And then Dalgleish is DALGLEISH, correct? And the Scottish Business Network is very simply SBN.Scott.
That's us.
SBN.Scott. So you'll find more about Scott, you'll find more about Scotland, you'll find more about the Scottish Business Network, you'll find more about what's happening now, boots on the ground in New York, and maybe next time we'll be talking about boots on the ground in Brazil.
I'd love to. That'd be exciting, that.
So take care. Thanks again, Scott, for sharing your time.
Thanks so much for having me on, Tom.
And I'd like to thank our audience and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. And more about them on their site, www.focusmi.com. That's focusmi.com, Focus MI. Visit our website, talktobrazil.com. Find our previous shows of Talk to Brazil, which are also available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, and many more. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.